It's 10 p.m. on D-Day. The sun has gone down, and there are tens of thousands of Allied troops ashore in Normandy.
The beach where the largest number of Allied soldiers met their fate was Omaha Beach, and now we'd like to really show it to you, what it really looks like, so you can imagine what it looked like this morning when the assault craft made their moves.
This is Paul Woodage. Some of you may know Paul from World War II TV, which is a really awesome channel that if you don't know, you owe it to yourself to check out, and there'll be links down below. It goes in depth in a lot of aspects of the war that maybe we haven't gone so in depth into, but for our purposes today, Paul is an expert on, well, not just D-Day, but the entire Battle of Normandy. So Paul, first of all, thanks for being here with us.
Thanks, I'm really thrilled to be with you guys. It's a big honor, thank you.
No, it's great having you. And I want you to tell them where we are, what we're looking at, like they don't already know.
Well, of course we're Omaha Beach, but we're the eastern end of Omaha Beach, Widerstandsnest 60, one of the 15 German positions that overlook this stretch of sand. And the reason I wanted to bring you guys here is you don't need to do much more than look down there and you understand pretty much all the problems of Omaha Beach just by looking at it from here. It's the terrain advantage the Germans have.
I mean, it also really brings home the scale of how big this beach was. I mean, if you look at films like Saving Private Ryan, you get this feeling that it's, a bunch of tight guys going in on a beach, but it's not. It's a really, really big stretch of land. But why was Omaha Beach specifically such a problem compared to the other beaches?
Well, it's the shape is the main thing. It's this crescent moon shape. So we know that the German defences were mostly enfilading. The guns are firing sideways down the beach. So at this end, the eastern end, pretty much all the weaponry is firing down that way. The other end, it's all firing this way. In the middle, you have this interlocking series of defences. So the 88 at Dog Green up there can reach us. The 88 down there can reach down there. So the German firepower is just concentrated on this arena of hell, and the distances become greater because we're just an hour after low tide now, which means it's just exactly as it was when they came ashore at H-Hour on June the 6th. So we're talking 400, 500 yards of sand, the sandbars you can perfectly see here. So where on perhaps Saw Beach, you're coming in maybe 200 yards away from the seawall that is your objective.
No, it's interesting to me, since I actually have not been to Omaha Beach before today. I know people think that I get to travel to all of these locations, but because of the pandemic, and before that I was going to the World War I locations and stuff. So to me, a first impression is looking out there, looking out at sea and trying to picture that monstrous, vast armada and trying to be in, say, some German's shoes, seeing that and going,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. From here, you'd be able to see 2,500, maybe 3,000 ships. You could even maybe see the 800 ships over there on the horizon, because that's Utah Beach over there in the background. So you are seeing a hell of a lot of ships. Then you turn your way that way to the east and you see the several hundred more off Gold Beach over there as well. So it would have seemed like every ship in the world that ever been constructed was heading right to your backyard.
And speaking of the ships, I mean, today we have weather which is very similar to the 6th of June when it comes to, slightly overcast, a little bit of sun coming in and whatnot. We got waves out there, nothing like what happened on the 6th of June. But can you describe a little bit of why that specifically was a problem here on Omaha as well? Because, I mean, we had the sand, there were so many issues, right?
Yeah, it's a little catalogue of individual mistakes, oversights, maybe errors that if just one of them had gone wrong, wouldn't have made a difference. When you added them all together, it just became this massive effect. So one of the things we still can't really satisfactorily explain is the distance from which the coast, the men were transferred from the troop ships to the landing craft. So they're doing it 10 miles offshore here.
yeah.
So you're spending 3-4 hours minimum in a landing craft before you even get towards the beach, sometimes 7 or 8 hours. And at that time, when they boarded, it's still dark. It's pitching and rolling, 10-foot waves then. So.
Now, a question, when it's high tide, right, does it comes all the way up to the
It comes
tree line?
right the way up where you cannot see any sand at all. It comes right up to the green section down there.
And during the planning, were they aware of the difference? They knew when the high tide and low tide was, of course, but were they aware of the distance in the difference in distance.
They were aware of the distance. What they hadn't really detected in Omaha is this sandbar situation that you get here.
Yeah.
And it depends how strong the wind has been the previous days and what time of year it is with the tides. But the problem is, and it's not so exaggerated today, there can be as much as 12 foot in height difference between the bottom of one of those troughs of water and the top of the sandbar.
And you got your full gear.
And you got your full gear on, and they're coming in that morning. The coast is obscured by the naval bombardment. There's still the smoke and dust from the aerial bombardment, the bits that haven't missed the beach. So you're coming in there, then suddenly the coxswain feels that landing craft slam on the beach. But it often isn't at the beach. It's a sandbar before the beach. Then the men run out. Then they hit that trough of water because they've hit that bit of deep water there. You see that in that famous photo of the guys as they get out the landing craft, they're knee deep. And then as they move up the beach to where it should be getting less less deep, they're hitting the deep water there. And they've got 60, 70 pounds of gear. So those sandbars are where the first things started going wrong. And there you're still 300 yards maybe from the seawall.
Under fire.
Under fire from the weapons like where we're standing.
What was the water temperature like that morning?
In Fahrenheit, it's mid-50s if you're lucky.
Okay,
You spend a few minutes in there and hypothermia starts kicking in. And we know now that the 7-hour ride in some of these guys they're standing up to their shins or knees in freezing cold water.
So it's like 13.
So your body temperature's dropping, your hypothermia is beginning to set in. And also, I always say, because of the Omaha veterans I know, is you've got that much longer to think about what's going to happen to me. The best way to take men from relaxed state to combat is to kind of throw them into it very, very quickly. These guys have hours to think about, is it going to be me? Is it going to be Jim? Is it going to be Fred there? Then they hit that beach. And honestly, one of the things that often gets kind of misreported is the movie idea gives us this sense that as soon as the ramp went down, they're hit in the middle of the landing craft there. That happened a bit, but the Germans had their machine guns mostly trained on a bit about halfway across the beach. So there's almost this lull before the storm aspect. When you get out of the landing craft, the gunfire doesn't start, then you get halfway across the beach and then it all opens up.
Here we're in a position that would have been largely artillery, not so much MG-42s.
Yep.
And how far down, like from here, where we have like a bit of a perspective, how far down were the closest German positions that were in any way, like, entrenched?
Well, there's the top part of the bluff of the Widerstandswehr 60 where we are at, and there's another beach part down there at the bottom of the draw that had some open kind of earth emplacements with machine guns and rifles. So there's two parts of the same defence. Then Widerstandswehr 61 is just about 500 yards that way with weaponry coming this way. There's some more German defences over there. There's a 5-centimetre howitzer just down there to my right. There's a tank turret down there, 2 mortars there, another artillery piece over there. So half of the beach is within range from here. There's another position just down there.
Now, what about the beach exits? Like, let's say when they were planning and thinking, okay, it's going to be smooth sailing, and in some alternate reality, it was smooth sailing and stuff. How do you get off the beach?
Well, there's exits and there's draws, which are terms that have come to be kind of interchangeable. They're not really. The exits are the precise means of getting off the sand to the immediate area beyond that sand. Right, so either bits of sort of rough ground or kind of gorse bushes. Then there's the draws, which are the valleys going up. So running just in front of us, and we can't see it from here and the camera won't pick it up, is the F1 draw, which runs down maybe 100 yards behind us and comes up to, in fact, where we're parked. Then going that way, westwards down the beach, are the 4 other draws. And these 5 draws are the arteries up which the various regimental combat teams will make their moves, but they're not the same. So one is defended by an anti-tank wall and a tank ditch. One has got barbed wire and mines. One has got, It's
a lucky dip.
It's a lucky dip. And generally on D-Day, the invasion force, that first wave, was shunted down 200 to 1,000 yards to the east from where they were supposed to be. So one of the big problems on that first moment, when the 60 landing craft that make up the first wave come in there, they have worked out to come ashore on a very precise bit of the beach where they've looked at the big maps. They know where there's a bunker to the left that's got a 5-centimetre in it. There's a little trench line over there to the right that's got this in it. And they're meant to all click into action and go about their exact tasks, where the sergeant sets up his base of fire and the corporal gets his 50mm mortar firing at that position there. They then find themselves 500 yards down to the east of where they're supposed to be. Yeah. So someone has to go, so where the hell are we then, sir, sarge, whatever it is? And then the sergeant or the officer pulls out his map case, tries to work out where he is, field glasses. About 80% of the platoon commanders are killed or wounded in the first 10 minutes in that first wave. Wow. So then you've got a command. situation because the guys there who've only ever run up behind Lieutenant Smith is no longer there. I mean, in training, they've only ever run up behind him.
Yeah.
Suddenly he's got not there, and the bit of beach you've trained for, because you've trained on an exact model of this on a sand table, that's not the bit of beach that's ahead of you that is confronting you. So there's this moment where you're not quite sure where you are and not sure what to do. And that's, of course, the moment that all this weaponry kicks in.
If you look at like a lot of other documentaries, and if you look at like also the movie variety of it, a lot is made of what a shock it was for the American troops who were landing down here and what a terrible experience it was. But I mean, it was the same up here on the German side, of course.
Yeah.
They were experiencing the same thing. How much, in your opinion, did the human factor deteriorate the situation once it started going south? Or did it not? That's like a kind of provocative question, but...
Yeah, well, I think you've got that first 30 minutes, hour maybe, where both sides are not sure what's happening. Because for Americans, it's kind of gone wrong a bit. And again, there's the Sherman DD tanks haven't arrived. There's another whole story that we can cover later on. At least they haven't arrived this end of the beach. They're starting to arrive the other end of the beach. There's no armoured support. The naval bombardment has either not started it or missed its targets. The rockets have missed. The aerial bombardment has missed. So there's a moment that lasts maybe 30 minutes while the Americans are, where the hell are we? What are we going to do? Let's get out of this. But the Germans, and this is, I think, one of the things I really want to get across, as confident as they are that they will stop this invasion at the water's edge, Rommel has basically told them that, is they don't have ammunition for a long fight. They don't have a huge amount. These mortars here might have 20, 30, 40 rounds behind them. So that first 30 minutes, they go boom, boom, boom. But then after that first wave, and it's the first wave that bears the brunt of everything. So the other end of the beach, A Company, 116th, 85% killed or wounded getting across the sand. That's the famous Bedford boys down there. E Company, F Company, 16th Infantry, bad losses. L Company down there, bad losses. But they're not completely eliminated. So then within 5-10 minutes, the second wave comes ashore. And their casualty rates drop dramatically to, it's still terrible, but maybe 40 to 50% killed or wounded. And the third wave comes in 10 minutes after that, 20% killed or wounded. So when the smoke clears, and I mean that literally and figuratively, after that first wave, the Germans look down there thinking, well, we should have stopped it all. But no, there were still landing craft. And that's when the realization of how much is coming your way, because you can now see column after column that's bringing in second wave, third wave, fourth wave. And these Germans just don't have the ammunition to deal with that, which is why a lot of German positions run out of ammunition before they're overtaken. Now, where we're standing here, we're going off into that story. This was probably, despite its brilliant view down the coast, one of the very first German positions to be taken out from behind, in fact.
Okay.
Because members of L Company 16th Infantry, who'd lost all their officers, bar one, who was kind of the slightly overweight, been great logistics kind of guy with him in North Africa, but not kind of the traditional hero. Jimmy Monteith is the only guy down there alive in his company, and he leads a rabble of kind of disorganized guys from L Company up this draw here that the Germans don't actually have anybody defending the draw.
Okay.
Their confidence is such that everybody, as I just said, will be killed in the first wave halfway across the beach. That hasn't happened. And over the next hour and a half, Jimmy Monteith leads these 30 or so guys up this draw there. He leads a tank that had come ashore on foot through a minefield at the bottom, knocking out the little group of Germans down there when the kind of the earthworks, and then actually attacks this. When I do this, normally I say, well, actually not so much attack it as walked in from behind. By 8:30 in the morning, there's these 30 Americans coming in from behind the direction we ourselves came in from, almost tapping these Germans on the shoulder and saying, boo, you're taken. And boom, there's the American flags kind of up here. A few Germans down the front there held out till the next day. So despite its incredible view,
The panorama is amazing. Yeah.
within 2 hours, this has been eliminated. Although, to continue the story, his defense of the area over there was the key bit, because the Germans, the rest of the 352nd Division Land, who are now desperately racing towards the coast, realise there's a key position on Omaha Beach. They didn't call it Omaha Beach, that was our name for it, but their defensive sector. But they realise, it says all on Omaha Beach. But they must get here, because they realise if there's one place they can get to now with perhaps a couple of half tracks and a couple of tow bits of artillery, there they can fire down there, because by midday or so, and there's still people pinned down on Easy Red, which is kind of the central part of the beach has come right up into 10 feet now. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans pinned down on that bit there. If the Germans had got back at that point with a couple of half-tracks and 20 or 30 infantry here with a couple of MG42s and pushed back Monteith and his 30-odd guys back towards the beach, plonk an MG42 at midday and you got hundreds of Americans pinned up on 10 foot of sand, you could have a very different outcome here. So Monteith received the Medal of Honor for this action up there, which was a testament to how important Eisenhower, when he saw that potential citation, said this is the guy that's going to be getting a Medal of Honor because it's showing the aggressive spirit. There were 2 other Medal of Honors, but they were kind of life-saving, kind of people pulling others out of the water, and very important. But Monteith was that aggressive. Let's get it and get in up and get behind.
So you kind of mentioned it already, but then you talked about how they were pinned down. But why exactly did it take so long to get off the beach at Omaha compared to Utah, Sword, Gold, Juneau?
I think the main reason is just overcoming that initial bit where it all started going wrong. It's communicators, getting the information back about, hey, we aren't in the right place, but we're progressing there, and we need to bring this. And so people having to decide, do we land people where they were supposed to, or do we join them down the beach to where the other people have landed in the incorrect place? So that type of thing takes a bit of time there. And people like Bradley, who's off the coast there on his command ship, by the time he's getting information, it's 2 or 3 hours out of date. So that aspect isn't really is something we need to consider as well. So it was worse, but everything takes time. And don't forget, the force is bigger here. It's 2 regimental combat teams. It's 36,000 guys eventually coming ashore here compared to 12,000 on Juneau. So it takes longer to get that bigger sized organisation back on its on course again when things have gone initially wrong. And that's where the time is lost. So there's a moment where, although the Allies haven't got themselves sorted out yet, the Germans have already, in a sense, shot their bolt. So it has already changed in terms of the outcome has now changed, but you haven't noticed it yet as the American on the beach because you're still pinned down. But I hope I'm making myself make sense there. There's kind of a moment has changed already.
You mentioned the armor, and okay, we touch on it in the regular part of this series. Could you talk a little bit more about the armor and lack of armor and problems with armor and successes with armor at Omaha Beach?
Absolutely, and it's one of the things that I get very frustrated at how badly it's told in a lot of other documentaries. So again, there's successive waves of different types of armor and technology that are going to be coming in later and later. So the first 2 bits are the 2 battalions of DD tanks. So they're fully amphibious, canvas screens around the outside, periscope, so-and-so, the power off. And there's a battalion at the other end of the beach, a battalion at this end of the beach. And at this end, the eastern end, is where the battalion, as we all know, 32 tanks in the battalion. I think 29 are released off the landing craft, and of them, I think 27 sink, and then the other 2 that do get to the beach get knocked out. The other end of the beach, the other battalion, actually get the majority of their tanks ashore, albeit behind schedule. And they do lose a few on the way in. But when a documentary says there was no armoured support at all on Omaha Beach, they're already wrong because they're talking about one end of the beach. And again, what's happening is there are the dozer tanks and the slightly amphibious ones that have the wading exhausts at the back, and they're coming ashore within half an hour. So Monteith, who led this tank on, the tank he led up this beach here was one of the wading tanks from the same battalion, but another, so you've got A company, B company, so-and-so. Yeah. It's another lot coming in later, and then the dozer tanks come in. So yes, the very first wave of DDs that were supposed to be here to support that very first wave of infantry do not make it. But then as the second and third waves of infantry are coming ashore, by then the basic plan is starting to kick in and the second and third waves of tanks are coming in. So you do see photos, if you look for them, of DDs on the beach and wading tanks there. So
that's a big difference.
Yeah, it is a big difference.
Let's see some of those photos now. Yep.
So there's armoured support coming in all the time. And then there's the engineers coming in to clear gaps and things like that as well. So it's successively getting better and better. And I'm of the opinion that the labels we give Omaha of disaster on Omaha and bloody Omaha really are unfair and unjust. You look at the contemporary writing about Omaha back in the summer of '44 by the journalists. And Ernie Pyle was down there, Ernest Hemingway was down there the next couple of days. They're writing about Omaha Beach the same way as they're writing about Golden, Utah and the others. They're just talking about it as one of the successful landings of D-Day. And sure, the number of fatalities here was high, but the number of men landing was higher. And it's not the thousands people think it is. About 900 killed on Omaha Beach and about 3,000 wounded. Proportionally speaking, more Canadians died on Juneau than on Omaha Beach because it's a smaller force. So 390 killed there out of 12,000 is a higher percentage than the 8 to 900 here out of 36,000. So this most post-war idea of Omaha being that much worse than the other beaches is 1980s and 90s. That Saving Private Ryan, video games, Call of Duty, Medal of Honor. That's the way we write about Omaha these days, and it annoys me incredibly.
This will be interesting for a bunch of our fans because last year we did that special episode about the accuracy of the beach scene of Saving Private Ryan, which Markus Linke did most of the writing and research from. And it's really interesting to hear that because, you have different waves.
Yeah.
A wave can be a disaster without the operation being a disaster.
Exactly, yeah.
You're touching on a pet peeve of mine as well because of like how everybody focuses on this part of the beach. But I mean, if we're going to cover that in other parts of this series, but if we just go stone throw over in that direction and we look at what was happening behind Sword, Juneau, and Gold, right? We have just as fierce fighting going on there.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? I mean, is it only because of the media coverage in the 80s or 90s, or do you think that there are other reasons for it?
Well, the industry I have been in for the last 20 years has been part of it as well. In the story that tour guides tell to fit in with the time frame that tourists allocate to visit the beaches is all you have time to do on Omaha because you've already done the regular one-day American tour that 1.5 million people do a year is San Miguel's Utah Beach, Point du Hoc, Omaha Beach, American Cemetery. So within that time scale, all you've got time to do is the loss of life in the first wave, Bedford Boys, tragedy, 85%, twins losing their twin on the beach there, all that kind of stuff. Then it's straight off the cemetery.
And cut, series over. All right.
Well, that's
Sorry.
pretty much
And
how
it's
it is.
because, when I do an Omaha Beach tour, I basically spend 5 or 6 hours on Omaha Beach at various places of it, building up. So you go through how it all went wrong, and then you go through and then here's how it piles on and gets better and better and better. And the initiatives come in and the breakthroughs happen. And by even as early as 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, Omaha Beach was a very different place than how it had been at 6:30. Yeah. And by the afternoon, units are coming ashore with no casualties at all. They're coming straight ashore. They're setting up radios, things like that. And it's a very different thing. Beach barrage balloons being raised up and engineers, opening up roads and things, even by as early as, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
And it's interesting that you say that because I mean this hits close to home for us as well because when we started doing military history documentaries, one of the things that we spoke a lot about is to break up the national narrative, right? And to look at it from a more holistic perspective,
global perspective.
And I think that and I'm expressing my opinion here, but I get a feeling that that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at this is the American sector, so this is the only thing important to Americans. That's the Canadian sector over there. That's the only thing important to Canadians. And I mean, you're doing a fantastic job trying to break that up, but let me ask you this: do we need a new historical canon for D-Day?
I think we do. Yeah, I think. But the only way to get there is to wipe away all the things we think we know and start again from scratch. And that is a very difficult process because at the age I am, I grew up watching Patton and Guns of Navarone and Dirty Dozen and Longest Day and all those, and they're all seeped into my consciousness and all the things I believe are factual. Yeah. And to kind of wash that all away, all the 80s classic books, the Max Hastings and the Carlo D'Estes and that era there, which was good history then, but we now know a lot of that is out of date. We've moved on from it. It's old thinking. The idea of the Germans being incredibly efficient and we were hopeless and kind of blundered our way through. Speaking as a Brit is nonsense. The British and the Canadians was a kind of pretty well-oiled machine by 1944, and sure, we had a few problems in the battling German armour, but we bested them. And Omaha Beach has fallen victim to the way the story has been told. And documentaries so often start with Omaha Beach with kind of misty fog and flapping flags and sad kind of trumpet and trombone music and flute music coming in. And some presenter walk across the beach talking about the tragedy and the bloody wave, red-soaked blood topped waves and all that, and all those parents that lost their sons, and that's not an incorrect way to do it because that did happen to that first wave. But if you think about it from the other point of view, at the end of June the 6th, back in Portsmouth, Eisenhower's there. When he hears, I don't know he'd have had the exact figure of how many had been killed or wounded that day, but if he had been told it's less than 1,000 killed and 3,000 wounded, and we've basically held the beach out, he'd have been jumping up and down with glee.
He got that report because they had estimated 3 times as much wounded and killed. So three
So,
times.
you know,
we're talking
yeah.
about a significantly difference.
So I often, I'm a hat wearer, and I say to people, you've got to sometimes wear your emotional hat and sometimes wear your analytical hat. And there's a moment to be on that beach and walk along it at low tide and think about the loss of life in that first wave, and it's tragic, and brothers lost their twin and parents lost their son there. But then there's the analytical hat you put on and go, but it was a completely successful landing that got off the beach, reached most of its objectives by the end of June the 6th, and 36,000 men to come ashore for less than 1,000 killed. I mean, this is really good going.
In this war?
Yeah, it's really good going, you know, and sure, we didn't reach all our June the 6th targets, but we've made 5 separate landings on 5 beachheads that have all been successful, and we're forging our way inland towards those next objectives. So it's gone very well.
You mentioned, I mean, now we're talking a little bit about the post-war fog, right? But there's also the fog of war. And here was quite literally the fog of war. It was on all the beaches, but especially here because of all the vegetation as well that was burning. And we were talking about, and this also, every film fails to show us what was going on there because visibility for a while at least was more or less zero, right? How do you, I mean, how much of that do you think impacted not just the difficulties, but also the human suffering that was going on here, being in the blind and everything that went on? Just, I mean, because they're not just dying, they're also blinded. They've got their gas mask on. It's almost like we're back to your kind of Great War situation, which is going on here. I mean, you've talked to veterans and things like that. Do you? Yeah,
no, definitely. I mean, we can show a veteran now, you were supposed to land here, but actually you were there. And they go, oh, but at the time they had no idea where they were. And it's alien environment. As you say, there's smoke billowing. And despite the fact there's this massive force coming in behind you, the universal kind of response I've got from vets is how isolated it felt for you as an individual. It felt very lonely there because let's take those 60 landing craft in that first wave. That 60 landing craft, 10 feet wide down a 4.5 mile beach. So the Saving Private Ryan video game idea of these landing craft coming in where you can almost shout across from landing one landing craft the next because they're 20 feet away, well, it doesn't work. The maths doesn't work. 60 landing craft down 4.5 miles is several hundred yards between each one because of just how it works. Sure. So when that landing craft comes ashore, you feel isolated because you absolutely are isolated.
And the next, half your guys down.
Half your guys are down. You're spreading out across the beach there. You're losing men with your heavy equipment in those sandbars and the troughs of water as they push up there. So it's very isolating, and the fog and the fog of war, literally and metaphorically, is there in front of you. And those first moments were incredibly intense. And when I've been there with veterans, the last thing you do as a historian is say, but it got better later. When they're talking about the shittiness of that first half an hour, you don't go, yeah, but you've got all these men behind you coming in, because that's not their experience. That's not what they were feeling like at that time there.
I've spoken to a few myself over the years, and I mean, anecdotally, nobody got over it.
No. I mean, there's the famous account of Heinz Severloh, the German machine gunner, who was down at Widerstands 62, so about 600 yards that way. And a lot of the Germans who actually weren't behind MG42s, they were behind Polish guns and 08s and things like that, all the other foreign guns the Germans are using. There's maybe only about 10 MG42s of the 80 down the beach, probably of that type. But Heinz Severloh did have an MG42. And his account, he wrote about it, he said, I was firing down that beach all day. Okay, so he was there and he didn't surrender until 4 in the afternoon or something. He fired 11,000 rounds. Now, with an MG42, there's no way you can make 11,000 rounds last all day. Wow. There were huge gaps, must have been, in between bursts he was firing. But in his recollection of it, when he spoke about it, he wasn't lying deliberately, I don't think. He genuinely felt he'd been firing his machine gun all day, but it doesn't work out mathematically. 11,000, if you just do that, that's 6 minutes or something. So how he referenced it is clearly very different to actually how it was, but that's because that slowing down of time thing or speeding up of time that happens to men in combat down there.
Now, how effective or ineffective were the naval guns in assisting the Omaha beach landing?
Two phases again. So
that's why
the initial naval bombardment generally either didn't hit its targets or it was ineffective, because firing an 8-inch shell at a bunker that's 7 miles away just doesn't work. What happened later on is just the improvisation. Individual destroyer commanders, the McClellan was one of them, they decide that I'm going to just run my vessel in closer. They're hearing it, Graunch on the
sand,
sound underneath there. And you kind of have the situation. I think there's a story of a C Company 116th guy down there who gets up the German bluff, and there's some kind of German radio set there saying he's just twiddling knobs and ends up finding a frequency. And it's some guy who's on a truck, on an LCT or something out there, who picks up this because he's just going around listening for stuff. And eventually message kind of is shouted from one person to the other, left a bit, up a bit, and then the destroyer starts firing back at the bluffs there. And that hadn't been accounted for and planned for that way, because they all have their fire orders, and you will fire on this quadrant in a W shape for 15 minutes, then move to this area here. But it's the improvisation that happens. People just start realizing, hang on, I need to do something. And you get that NCO thing where the officers who are lost, they start saying, well, who's got a Bangalore torpedo? I have. Well, I think we should use it over there. And that's what happens. And I think when I try and make the point, and you do on your channel there, is that that's the sense of, if in doubt, do something that the Allied army has. That as a rule of thumb, the Germans don't quite have that. I know there's the Auftrag-Taktik kind of thing, but the Germans in these positions here who aren't the best, they have been told, fire your gun on that angle there until you run out of ammo. They don't really start picking up their weapons and moving to other locations and thinking, hang on, there's a gap there. I should try and fill in that. So the interlocking nature of the German defences stays fixed. So what happens is when that gun there gets knocked out, there's a gap on the beach.
Right. Okay.
Some group down there realise that the machine gun fire that was swinging left and right in front of them has now stopped at a certain point, and they start going, well, hang on, if we go slightly to the right of where that gun swings round. And it's very hard to explain as a tour guide or as a documentary, is that where you end up landing with your boat team and you move forward and knock out a gun in front of you, you're not making the life of you and your company any easier. Because the gun you've eliminated isn't shooting at you. It's firing 1.5 miles to your left or right. But what's happened is someone 1.5 miles down to your left, their bit of beach has suddenly got a bit better for a reason they really can't explain why, but they feel, I think we can move. So they then knock out a bunker near them that then makes life better again for someone down the beach there. So ideally, I would be kind of TARDISing myself up and down the beach on a tour going, so this bit here connects to that bit over there, that then connects back here, but you obviously, by limitation, you have to stay in one place. So it's very hard for anybody to say to me as a historian of Normandy, so where's the moment the Battle of Omaha Beach broke? Which is the defining moment? Because it's not. It's one thing there that connects to one thing there that's over there, another tank does that, and that's how it's working. And suddenly, not suddenly, progressively, there's a realization, hang on, we're over the worst.
But you know what, this is like a microcosm of one of our channel slogans. History does not happen in a vacuum.
Yep.
It's not this isolated event and that nothing else really mattered but that. So just what you just talked about is that slogan in microcosm.
And it also, I mean, what strikes me when you're talking about it is that goes back to what you were talking about, this being in a bubble, being isolated in a world of horror, right? Mm-hmm. So you're there on the beach and you're fighting against that position over there for the Germans, and it's not going to help you, and you don't even know who it's going to help. So it's got to feel at the moment pretty useless what you're doing, because you don't. Yeah. There's no way of knowing it. I mean, that's got to be terrible. Yeah,
right? and so just on my tours, and I've explained how all these things have come together and brought the victory. There's a photo taken just in front of us down there, late part of the day, and there's 7 or 8, 9 bodies washed up on the shingle. One has got a K-ration box over the head, and there's a guy who's sitting looking at these bodies, and he's clearly older because he's got a ball patch like I've got, and he's kind of got that kind of thick neck look of an older guy. So he's in his 40s. I don't know who he is. He's got an tanker's jacket, and his body, you can't see his face because you're looking at it from behind, but his body language is all hunched over, and he's looking at these bodies, and and I always say, so what's he thinking? And so just at the moment that Eisenhower is really pleased that this has gone okay, there's some poor guy who doesn't really care about the fact the exits have been cleared and the engineers are building roads. His day has finished looking at the 6 bodies in front of him that maybe the guy with the K-ration, they've put the box there because the guy's missing his head, maybe his head was cut to cabot. So that's it's the emotional hat and the analytical hat again. That's why I think this is some of the experience that builds on. You asked earlier about this 80s, 90s disaster on Omaha Beach. Is some of the men at the end of that day, it felt really shitty that day because there is a lot of blood in the water down there. There is a lot of wounded down there, and so at that point, it's hard to see the victory that's actually occurred because you're in that small world. Right. There's the Ernie Pyle bit when he walks down that beach the next day. And he's talking about all the V-mail letters that are billowing across this beach. And he talks about how many letters would have been written on them. Right. And Bibles and bandages and abandoned life belts, I think is one of the phrases he uses in that. And that's he's talking about the human detriment that was at the end of the beach that day. So while he's doing that, the colonels and generals are saying, well, that was successful. Off to Saint Lo, and they're happening at the same time. Those two events are paradoxically different, but they're happening at the same time.
And I mean, interesting, we covered this in our main episodes a lot. I mean, we have the story developing in media as well over the day, globally. I mean, it's really going out as it's happening. So, I mean, this happens to happen on Omaha. It's one of the infantrymen who gets word of what the reporting has been on CBS in America about great victory, about great, progress and everything. And he throws a fit because, that's not what's going on here. And of course, like you've said so many times, that applies to all of the beaches. That's not just Omaha. Every single beach had the exactly same situation. People died, people were mutilated, maimed. It was terrible. But how much, I'm leading to something a little bit different. How much do you think they understood down here on the beach that what they were doing was also really, really important for propaganda purposes in order to show the world? Because, I mean, Eisenhower speaks of it in his orders in the morning, right, or his opening speech. But did they really understand that? Do you think they understood
No, I don't
that?
think so. No, there's another famous photo that is this column that's coming off the beach, snaking up past one of the bunkers, again, Avidas Lonza 65. And it was taken on June the 8th. It's members of the 2nd Division coming ashore. And it's all staged. It's staged in a clever way. So the snaking column is pointing in a V shape inland, so essentially towards Germany. And there's this, sort of never-ending armada of ships behind there. And the impression it's trying to get is this beginning of this huge tail of reinforcements coming. And it's a message. It's kind of a message to Hitler saying, all this is coming your direction. And I met one of the guys who's coming up in this column because they're coming off boats to take up the advance towards Saint Lo, and some, as far as they're concerned, idiot photographer is making them walk a stupid way when there's a nice, gentle path up there, and they're going, no, I'm going to walk up here, up this nice, because you're making this nice shape. And as they're going past, this guy told me they're all swearing at this cameraman, going, what the hell are you doing, mate, making us do this, you idiot, you muppet. Yeah. But it's all because the propaganda image that they can't see at all the reason behind, because he's telling them, this photographer, when your mum sends you this photo, you'll understand why I took it. Yeah. And that photo is always used as the cover of books about Omaha Beach and the progression of because it's a photo of victory. It's like the flag raising in Iwo Jima, but kind of same kind of different thing. And so I think most guys who are anywhere near this beach for the next 2 or 3 days had no idea of what's going on behind, no idea of the sense this has been successful, no idea of any of that, because they're picking up the battle. That's the.
Do you think that they were bitter about it?
I don't know. Bitters are.
I mean, at the moment, not
at the moment,
yeah,
possibly, yeah. And there's certainly some decisions were made that are a bit odd. Is that on Dog White section of the beach, for example, was where the first temporary American cemetery was set up. So people are coming ashore the next day, all kind of bright and breezy, hey ho, and off they come past the wooden crosses of the guy who died before. Then they moved it to what became the American cemetery that we all know and go now, but. No one had thought, hang on, perhaps not put the graves where the guys are coming ashore. That was a mistake that I couldn't tell you how many thousands of guys would have walked past that. And that's a terrible way to set your foot into Normandy, to go past the graves of the guys who died the day before. But that's kind of the thing that was decisions are being made where people aren't really thinking necessarily about how that's going to affect the guys on the ground.
Finally, that leads me to a question that sort of goes to both of you. Was Omaha Beach in some ways more like a World War I battle because of the entrenchment, because of the very narrow movement, because of opening over open ground? Or is this, as it has been told in so many media stories, a classic World War II battle?
Okay, when you think of, say, amphibious invasions and stuff, there were some in the Great War. I mean, there were some majorly successful ones that people don't talk about today, like Riga and stuff in towards the end of the war. The one people think of is, of course, the first day at Gallipoli, and the thing again and again at Gallipoli. I don't really compare this to that, because even just the naval technology and the aerial technology sort of precludes a real comparison, even if what the infantry was going through, especially the first waves of each of them, even if what they were going to was very similar, it's kind of hard to compare them because of the leaps of technology behind them and what was put into them and the assumptions made. So.
And when you meet people who come here, of course, you know, some of them descendants of the people who, or many of them descendants of people who fought here somewhere in Normandy, maybe not in Omaha, but at some point. Is there a feeling of continuation from World War I into World War II, especially here in Omaha, but in general?
I think there is, but maybe not that they've thought about it in that way. I mean, when I've done boat trips off Omaha, I mean, I walked that beach, you know, thousands of times, and I know that it worked. I know that the progressive sequence of events came to work and the landings. But there's something about seeing it from out there, because when you're out there, the bluffs look like they're vertical. And there's the crescent moon shape I talked about earlier. So I think there is that psychological kind of over the top, like in the trenches aspect of it. And I know there's a guy, I think it was in the 16th Infantry, who was one of the regimental historians, who referred to this after D-Day as the Gallipoli of World War II, but not necessarily about the entrenched, but the kind of the physical view. As you were coming in here, no matter how, if you'd attended 1,000 briefings about this, if you'd got a sight of this terrain over the front of the landing, you'd have thought, why the hell are we landing? This is a fishbowl of this crescent moon there. That for them, it would have maybe seemed a bit like going over the top.
You also got to think...
And the distances.
For the planners, that would be very different because, you know, when the British and French were really planning Gallipoli, they didn't think much of the Ottomans, who really showed... The one thing you learn in the Great War is that every army could fight. Anytime it's always... Romania is going to be a pushover, not a pushover. The Ottomans are going to be pushover, not a pushover. The opinion of the German defenders by the planners was a lot higher than the opinions of the Ottoman defenders and stuff. So you have to take that into account for the planners. But as you say, sure, for the actual, for Joe Schmo who's getting off his duck, you know.
I think there's the element of how small the force felt when you were at the front of it, and how small the German defences were when you were at the front of them. Yeah. So I think that bit, you know, if you were on the Somme in 1916, someone tells you there's how many X million numbers of British and French troops in this army. When you're there going across that, it didn't feel like that. Yeah. And I think the same thing applies there, those 60 landing craft in that first wave, because as I said, there's 36,000 men going to be coming ashore here, but the first wave is 1,600. And there's 1,600 coming ashore against 300 or 400 Germans in these positions there, in this space there. So, I can see that moment there, it does feel very First World War-like. And you probably would have been thinking, why am I at the front? Why? How did this work out? Yeah. Of all this might that I see in England, and I'm a plumber from Wisconsin, and I'm the guy at the front coming out that landing craft. But yeah. But in many other ways, it's a World War II one, because it's the big war the Allies have got. It's artillery and naval power and aerial power all coming together. It's combined arms. It's everything we've learned in the Mediterranean. Yeah. You know, through Torch and Husky and everything is coming to fruition here, of having that huge, great resource. And yeah, when we talk about an 88 here and 88 there, I think there's 60 or something naval guns out there of 5-inch and bigger in caliber out there. So it's a very one-sided battle in terms of the firepower the Allies can put from there on that beach. But yeah, again, that first wave, you don't feel that firepower behind you when you're getting out of a landing craft and crossing 500 yards of sand.
Yeah, and I think that when you guys think, you wonder, why was Omaha so difficult? Why was every beach so difficult? I mean, you should just watch the aerial footage that we're showing you here, and now think of being just one little guy in the middle of this huge beach behind us, and I think you'll understand what hell it was to go through there and why it was so difficult for each and every one of them.
Wow. And let's take this opportunity to go to the east end of the Allied assault beaches to Sword and inland from there, as the men there shut down for the night. So, the 3rd Division is dug in for the night north of Caen. There is much discussion about the whole Caen objective and its feasibility. If, for example, K.P. Smith had managed to get the whole 185th Brigade there and attack it, they would be fighting the 21st Panzer Division, who already have defenses set up, who also know the area well, and have even practiced fighting over it. Smith's regiment would also be at the head of a line stretching back to Sword, which 21st Panzers could cut off or even surround. And as for support, most of the armor is guarding the flanks of any approach to the beachhead, so that seems to be it. There are those, however, who have issues with this. Robin Dunn, who commands a troop of the 7th Field Regiment, writes in his diary, "What a terrible use of armor. What a waste this is. East of the Orne, the land is no good for armor, being so wooded, so the enemy won't attack from there." And he lays the failure to reach Caen at Smith's feet for being afraid of the enemy armor. Well, at Rennie's feet too, for it is he that actually moved the armor to the flanks. So Dunn thinks Rennie wrecked the chance to take Caen this day. The plan now lay in ruins. 9th Brigade and the East Riding Yeomanry hardly fired a shot all day and took no part in the advance towards Caen. You can do with a platoon on D-Day what you cannot with a battalion on D-Day +1 or a division on D-Day +3. But that's just a what if, right? And maybe it would be a more plausible one if 3rd Division's only objective today was Caen. But it wasn't. They also have had to link up with the Airborne on their left and the Canadians on their right, and both hold and consolidate Sword Beach. I will actually quote Peter Caddick-Adams' thoughts on the matter. If the 185th Brigade was sticky in reaching Caen, it was because Rennie, Crocker, and Dempsey had become infected with Montgomery's overconfidence in his master plan. None paused before the invasion to reassess its viability and give Smith enough combat power. And then he quotes one historian. That's what he says. I don't know the name. Montgomery's greatest error was not his failure to take Caen, but his prediction of its capture in the initial assault. And Caddick-Adams has these words to offer as well. "There is no better place from which to understand the Atlantic Wall than to stand atop Ludwig Krug's position at Hillman and gaze at the nearby coast. Then look inland. The outskirts of Caen are also just within sight from this prominent spot. Here, in a single glance, the whole story of the eastern sector of the Allied assault unfolds. For the coast would witness the landing of the British 3rd Division on D-Day, whose objective, Caen, proved just beyond their grasp."
So many of these segments seem to end with closing words, good words of finality.
But we are not yet there, my friend. There is still an hour to go. The guns are still firing in many places. We mentioned the problem of friendly fire a couple of times today. One of the Canadians who landed at Juno Beach is a victim of it as the day comes to its end. Lieutenant James Dewan of the 13th Field Regiment of the Canadian Artillery is the man. And he is a bit too slow with the password when confronted by a jumpy sentry while crossing between two command posts. And he is shot 6 times. One bullet hits a cigarette case, which is a classic, they always do. But 4 of them hit his legs, and 1 blows off a finger. He will survive, though. In fact, I met him in London just last week, actually.
Really?
Yeah, that guy has a really nice voice, and he does a lot of accents, too. He could be a radio actor, maybe. Hey, you know what would be a cool show?
What?
If 20 years or so from now, when everyone's finished talking about this war, they're gonna finish eventually. If there was a show about an adventure in space.
Show in space.
Yeah.
Like Flash Gordon.
More like a final frontier.
Like some kind of journey into space.
Yeah, like Star Voyage or Space Trek or something like that. Yeah.
That would be cool. What sort of character would Doohan play in that?
Let me see. He's a pretty tough cookie. He shot all those times and stuff. He led his artillerymen well today too. He took out a couple of snipers even. So maybe he should be like a tough guy, like the spaceship's engineer.
Well, that could work. What sort of accent would he have? A regular Canadian one?
Nah. Something more, stereotypically engineer, like he's from Ireland or he's from Scotland. Yeah.
They could call him Irish
Yeah.
or Scotty.
I would listen to that show.
Listen? My friend, if this is over 20 years in the future, it will not be on radio. It would be on television.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be cool.
James Dewan.
Wait. What do they do about his missing finger?
I don't know. They could make a flesh-colored glove with a fake finger, or they could just avoid showing his hand in his scenes.
Could work.
Yeah. And actually, I'd like to talk about one more character, one who was not directly involved today, another double agent.
The thing about double agents is that it can be hard to trust them. How do you truly know if their loyalty is genuine? And even if their loyalty is genuine, how do you know they won't change it once again? Things are even worse when you have a triple agent on your hands. Actually, MI5 are so worried about their triple agent that they bug his phone and open his letters. They call him Agent Brutus. Can he be trusted with the secrets of D-Day?
Okay, Brutus. Real name is Roman Czerniawski. He's a former Polish fighter pilot who escaped to France in 1939. After the fall of France, he set up Interallié, a Franco-Polish spy network centered on Paris and working for the British Special Operations Executive, SOE. He ran the network with Mathilde Carré, who he called La Chatte because of her soft footsteps. And here's how La Chatte describes Czerniawski. He's thin and muscular, with a long, narrow face, rather large nose, and green eyes, which must originally have been clear and attractive, but were now flecked with contusions as a result of a flying accident. But the soft-footed La Chatte betrays her partner in November 41 while being questioned by Abwehrfeldwebel Hugo Bleicher. Does Carré regret it? Well, maybe briefly. But then she gets very cozy with Bleicher. They shack up together and she spends the evenings gazing at the German as he plays the piano. Meanwhile, Czerniawski stews in prison, waiting for the firing squad. But he comes up with a plan. Collaborate! His motivations are a bit murky, though. He will later claim it was a trick to get out of jail and rejoin the Allies. On the other hand, Czerniawski is a fearsome anti-communist, and the Germans tempt him with a leadership role in some sort of future Polish vassal state. So, he makes a deal with Bleicher. Go to Britain and spy for Germany. Okay, so, in August 42, he reconnects with Polish intelligence service in Vichy, France. He tells them that he managed to escape during a traffic accident of his prison transport and then travels to London to a hero's welcome from the Polish government in exile. It takes him 6 weeks to reveal that he's an Abwehr agent. He does so in typical flamboyant style and proudly presents Colonel Stanislaw Gano of Polish intelligence with a 64-page report. This report describes his agreement with Bleicher, his Abwehr mission in London, and his scheme for turning the table and becoming a triple agent. He calls it the Great Game. But why wait 6 weeks for the big reveal, other than being a slow typist, perhaps? Well, Czerniawski claims that he needed to figure out whether the Germans had penetrated Polish intelligence in London. But some suspicious Polish and British intelligence officers rather think that Czerniawski needed those 6 weeks to conclude that the Germans' promises were hollow in order to rediscover his loyalty to the Allied cause. We'll never know the whole truth, but Colonel Gano will forever maintain that Czerniawski should have been shot as a traitor. There's a debate within the 20 Committee about what to do. Chairman Masterman is cautious. He thinks Czerniawski is too risky to recruit. But the Abwehr have been trying for weeks to contact him, and Tar Robertson reckons this is too good of an opportunity to miss. He recruits Czerniawski and assigns Christopher Harmer to be the case officer. Harmer keeps a very close eye on the Pole. it is he who comes up with the codename Brutus. It's a playful nickname that hides a very real fear of being stabbed in the back. Brutus makes his first transmission to Germany shortly before Christmas 42, and the Abwehr are very happy to hear from him. He sets himself up as a military observer and sends the German details of the Polish armed forces in Britain. The information is all very carefully controlled by the 20 Committee. Ham and Brutus travel across the country collecting content for the transmissions. On these trips, Brutus first tours an area and draws up his genuine observations complete with maps, unit insignias and details of commanding officers. Then Harmer waters it down and adds some fake information. As the months go on, Brutus gains the Abwehr's complete confidence. The Germans describe him as a very valuable wireless agent. He also wins over the British, and their suspicions gradually fade. But Brutus has more trouble with the Poles. He is furious after the April 43 discovery of the Kartography Forest massacre, where the Soviets murdered over 25,000 Polish officers, intellectuals, politicians, businessmen, and community leaders. Czerniawski is so angry that in June he prints out hundreds of leaflets attacking the Polish government in exile for its relationship with the Soviet murderers. He is sent to prison for 6 weeks as punishment for distributing these leaflets across London. This causes a problem because his radio goes off air. He tells the Germans that he's been arrested for anti-Bolshevik activities. When he starts transmitting again later in the summer, the Germans are suspicious. They're worried that the British have captured Brutus and that they are controlling his radio, of course. But Brutus turns on the charm, and by December, the Abwehr are praising him again. So, as 43 turns to 44, it's time for Brutus to get involved in Operation Fortitude. He tells the Germans that he's working so hard that he needs more cash, more codebooks, and even another transmitter. The 20 Committee decides to weave Brutus even deeper into Fortitude. So on May 18th, he reports to the Germans that the invasion force has recruited him because of his knowledge of France. From his new post within 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, he sends the Germans the entire order of battle of General George Patton's Ghost Army. Brutus ends his report with that it looks like FUSAG is ready to take part in active operations in the near future. Now, Brutus shows us how complex the game of trust and betrayal that espionage and counter-espionage is. Trust this, though. His contribution to Fortitude and Bodyguard is undeniable. His and all the other double-cross agents' shots with their secret weapons have hit true on their target. And that was Hitler's brain. Many in German command are fully convinced that the invasion is today, and no one truly believes in an invasion in Scandinavia or on the Atlantic coast, but Hitler has eaten up the nugget at the center of the ruse. Against all evidence, in defiance of clearly visible reality, the Nazi dictator will stay convinced for several weeks that the real event is still to come at Pas-de-Calais. And that is crucial in the fight ahead because Hitler controls the Panzer reserves. And although he will commit them, he will do so slowly and hesitantly. So after D-Day, Operation Overlord will slow down, and it will become an even deadlier battle for the Allies. Without double cross, it might very well have become a meat grinder with many more, tens of thousands more being killed.
But what now? To the Germans, it must seem like Brutus has got it all wrong. The Allies are landing in Normandy, not Calais, not Norway. Does this mean his credibility is burnt with the Abwehr? Well, we shall have to see. But already, the Double Cross Committee is working on salvaging the situation. In the aftermath of D-Day, Brutus will send apologetic messages with excuses for missing the forces sailing for Normandy. We know the Abwehr are addicted to Brutus's intelligence, so they might just accept these apologies. I hope that's the case, because Brutus is set to have a crucial role in the ongoing deceptions planned for the days and weeks after D-Day.
So many thousands upon thousands of people are, when you think about it, people around the world, for this is a very global thing by now.
What more have the Germans been reporting about it?
The first German radio news broadcast that isn't entirely propaganda has now gone out. They say the British and Americans are focusing on Carentan, Caen, and Cherbourg. German forces are prepared. The fighting is bloody. They only managed to land a few tanks. Many POWs.
I guess they have to say the places and all eventually. I mean, people will get the news anyhow, one way or another, right?
Oh, they will. Speaking of news, I'd like to end this hour with some news reporting. In a few minutes, just after 2300 hours, George Hicks will record another offshore recording from USS Ancon. He has these words for the world. You see the ships lying in all directions, just like black shadows on the gray sky. Now planes are going overhead. We're hearing the fire now just behind us. Bombs bursting on the shore and along in the convoys. Then he adds, if you'll excuse me, I'll just take a deep breath for the moment and stop breathing.